In such an amazing space with an amazing ceiling. So thank you for coming, and I'm really, really excited to tell you about my work. In a way, I'm not a digital artist, but tech informs how I think, and I suppose I'm a bit of a hacker, but not literally hacking hardware or digital stuff. I'm more like hacking social situations. So this talk is called Shopping Backwards. That was a performance that I did quite a lot of Zoom performances during the pandemic. I'm not sure what was happening in that one, but there's a luxury yacht coming out of my mouth. I kind of had lots of them inside of me and ended up coughing them up. This is a project that I worked on last year, and it's quite echoey. I'm kind of like hearing myself coming back at myself. Can you turn it down a bit? So this is a project called Uplands, and basically the process for making this animated project was I went on walks around my local area and I collected trash and I remixed it into these little characters that are almost like an NFT or some kind of crypto creature that could be launched onto the web as a currency in some way. But I decided, because that's ecologically quite unstable, I think, they would live in an animated world of my creation. But I also led some walks where people, members of the public, could take part in the process of creating these characters with me. And that's something that I'd like to continue and maybe create an alt currency that could fund litter picking and character development walks all over the world through the process of creating this currency. So we'll see how that works out. But for now, I want to just play you a bit of the animation that I made. It should actually have sound by now, I think. Is that in? I don't know why it doesn't have sound. Well, if the sound doesn't work, we'll just... Okay, well, never mind. Imagine sound. It's really just to give you a sense of what the way that I worked with these found images and put them together in a really basic way using Affinity Designer, which is a really cheap bit of Photoshop alternative software. The animation is about like kind of Silicon Valley culture, really, from the big kind of tech bro monopoly way of thinking to the more sort of hippie counterculture way of thinking. And that's what really interests me about the world of tech, like the human culture of tech, is that often there's a rethinking of ways of living and of structures, so that counterculture and big capitalism often think in similar ways, like around decentralization and kind of forms of communing, which maybe traditional cultural institutions haven't. So in a way, this is an animation about the way that tech culture thinks in the form of characters who are having various kind of breakdowns or breakups on this industrial estate that's near my house. And it was the only place I could really go during the pandemic. So often my process as an artist is very site-specific. I will go to a place and then I'll respond to that place, often starting with collecting or noticing things and then kind of speculating and transforming and intervening with what's already there. And sometimes that's participatory, because I might invite people along for the journey in the form of a walking workshop where they get to also notice things in public space. And other times it might be just me on my own, documenting little interventions and things. I'll show you more of them. I showed that film at an exhibition in which I also made this series of soaps that you can see on the wall on the left. The soaps were made of land that I'd taken from the industrial estate where the animation was filmed, or where the images were sourced. And I was really thinking about who owns that industrial estate. It's something that I really am interested in, who owns the land, and then who owns the bit underneath, and who owns the bit right to the Earth's core, and then, you know, further down and to space. And so this kind of absurdity of ownership of something which isn't really ownable, I'd like to take that literally, I suppose. And so these soaps were an act of theft of the space that the animation was made of. But there was an essay accompanying them which contextualized that more within a historical act of land exchange called sizing, which was a symbolic giving of a clump of soil that happened as part of kind of land buying practices in Britain hundreds of years ago. So I'm kind of whizzing through it, and I'll just keep whizzing because I think you'll get it through a process of like attrition or something. This is another example of literalizing the act of kind of taking the land and then like showing its ownership and who kind of has invested in it, but by physicalizing the process of ownership. Because there's a lot of public space in London which used to be owned by the government and the people, but has now been sold off to private companies all over the world. And so I collect parts of the land from the places that have been sold off and then send it to the people who now own it. And public do have access, but that could be taken away at any moment, and there might be certain rules, like in Canary Wharf, for example, there are certain rules about what you can and can't do there. So you can't protest in Canary Wharf, but you can kind of hang around as long as you're the right kind of person. Often there are dress codes and things like this. So by kind of sending the land back to people who own it, I just want to make it really obvious the absurdity of big capitalism. Like, so it might seem like my action is the odd thing, but in a way, the odd thing is already there. It's the legal structure that exists, which allows for public space to become an asset on a spreadsheet. So I do lots of interventions in public space. It might be things like taking a vegetable, like going to, say, an African food shop and buying a vegetable that I don't recognize and taking it into a supermarket like Tesco or any mainstream British supermarket and trying to buy this unknown vegetable, which I don't recognize, and seeing what happens when the cashier can't categorize it and maybe their manager can't categorize it. And a whole conversation arises from this need to work out how to price this vegetable. That's just a potato standing in for the vegetable. But there's lots of other props that I use. I think there's one of the vegetables there, that I use to kind of like intervene in the status quo. And often I would tell the story of that rather than documenting the action because I think videos of artists doing something in public space where people are looking are not as interesting as the rumor and the myth. I like the idea that it could be a recipe that anyone could do themselves. So here are some objects that I've used. Like the one on the bottom, this one, it's seeds that grow wildflowers that attract bats to live in buildings that are due to be renovated or sold off to real estate developers. And in British law, there's a Wildlife and Countryside Act that means that if the bats are there, then they can't demolish the building. So it's like small loopholes in legal systems interest me a lot, and how to kind of create your own loopholes. So how can, as a small individual, we just mess with power? I was sending the surface of Mayfair, which is a very expensive part of central London, to Gerald Cavendish Grosvenor, who is the aristocratic owner of Mayfair, because for him it's just an asset on an Excel spreadsheet, whereas I wanted to give him the physicality of the sensory experience of that place. He lives in a manor house in the north of England, and so the idea that he might be in his office kind of like thinking about his accounting and having all this stuff from the surface of Mayfair, that really pleased me. And it's another example of literalizing like the invisible power, I suppose, because Britain is owned by not very many people, and they're mostly aristocratic landowners who were given the land by William the Conqueror, and their families have inherited it. So it's a very bizarre kind of financial hierarchy that creates. Let's maybe some vegetables. And things just like taking the carpet out of my friend's house and using it to carpet the space between the Bank of England, the Bank of England's just over here, and a large office. I want to carpet all the slithers of space between buildings in the City of London, because it's a real kind of collage of buildings that they need to have gaps for legal reasons, and they become magnets for like smoking or just any kind of marginalized activity, like begging or anything like loitering or sheltering from the rain. And so to kind of highlight them or to claim them, that's what I was trying to do in this piece. Here's me talking through, I think that was me talking about some perfume that I carry around, and then every time I go past a stone statue, I spray it with perfume, and then gradually over the last decade, most of the statues in London have become imbued with a more feminine scent than perhaps their patriarchal posture might suggest. So sometimes I'll do walks that will use this live writing process, really, this improv process of going around public space, noticing things, and then making connections between things, or reversing the kind of systems and protocol that are there. So this is an example of doing that, where I lead walks. And this is in a rural setting at Supernormal Festival, which is a music and arts festival in England. And it's called 1 Hour Holiday, and we have a 2-week holiday of a lifetime within 1 hour. And we have to work out what that holiday was and how it happened using the group, really. And I think everybody has the capability to analyze and come up with ideas, and if you create a structure through which to do that and connect it together, it's kind of an algorithm, really. And so it facilitates a level of kind of creative complexity that might feel a little bit intimidating, perhaps, to people without that structure. So in kind of facilitating what's there already within the imaginary spaces of the participants, and unlocking like a psychological space as well. I think it's kind of hacking the unconscious of the group and then using that collectively to make an alternate reality. And if that isn't virtual reality, then I don't know what is. It's kind of, it's borrowing what the internet does and what AI and virtual reality and augmented reality does, but I'm not really using tech. But then you could say that everything is tech, and the fact that my hand was sweating a bit is tech, and if there was a rule that meant that you had to sit in a certain way, or there was some kind of etiquette, that's all just tech, isn't it? So meet tech is perhaps something that I'm doing, and it seems to resonate with hacker culture. This is a piece where I decided that there should be a sea monster in Hastings, which is a quite poor town on the coast in the south of England, and it needs regeneration projects. So I was trying to attract a sea monster, but asking the members of the public on the trains, what kind of sea monster they wanted to attract, because the Loch Ness Monster makes millions and millions of pounds a year for Loch Ness in Scotland. And so it was a kind of train-based focus group where people would rummage in my pillowcase and feel the objects that are inside and then describe the body of a sea monster that happened to be within their mind. So it's a kind of spoof regeneration activity. So it's satire of regeneration attempts, but also people were quite easily able to imagine these sea monsters. And after collecting all the descriptions, me and a group of my friends became a band which stood on the top of a toilet block by the sea and kind of chanted these descriptions at the sea in the hope of attracting the sea monster. This is a piece that I made for Tate, which it was really a recipe for how to be in the pre-Raphaelite room. You probably can't really see it here, but it guides you step by step around the artworks. You just choose random numbers and then walk to the painting of that number, and you make friends with a character based on your choice, and then you plan a holiday with them, and you end up writing a letter to your best friend about the holiday that you had with the pre-Raphaelite painting. And it is a recipe for live writing, really. So it's different methods of getting the process to the audience, but often involving participation. And at Tate, I was doing a residency where schools groups were coming in each day, and I was taking them around the galleries in Tate Modern. And sometimes we would write a letter to the Prime Minister, because I wanted to ask all the kids that were coming to see the work, who often found it confusing to be in a gallery and confusing to see modern art, and they felt alienated by it. So I wanted to figure out whether confusion is a form of resistance, or whether there's some kind of political potential within confusion. And we explored this by taking the newspapers, remixing them just by taking bits and doing a surrealist cut-up method, and then writing to the Prime Minister with this remixed newspaper narrative. And we didn't say who it was from, but they signed it in their children's handwriting afterwards. And they were really excited by the thought that this actually went to the Prime Minister. And they didn't really know whether that was allowed or whether that was possible. And I'd ask them, do you think that he will listen if he doesn't really know what this is about? And they often would say that they thought that he would think about it more if there wasn't a defined outcome that we were asking for. So if we just asked for more money to be spent on education, he could ignore that. But if we sent him a surrealist poem that remixes the newspaper, he might have to work out something for himself. So it's like an antidote to passivity and to apathy, and I think that's what my work does in general. It kind of shakes up an irresponsible way of being in the world, and it makes us more responsive and more responsible, maybe. So here's another example of a participatory performance that involved responding to a place together with a group. And here's a kind of much more slapstick comedy performance about clutter and trash that I did with my friend Fritha. So this doesn't involve participation. It is a kind of foraging within the repressed world that is trash and clutter and the stuff that is found in the dump in my local area of Walthamstow in East London. I'm really interested in trash and clutter and e-waste, and I think it might just be because, like, of my background, of like my kind of like working class grandparents, and like cooking being about finding whatever is in the fridge or the cupboard and just improvising. So I think there's a kind of class politics to improv as well. And like the best food is peasant food, isn't it? Like pizza and pies and things. Offcuts, I think that's one of my interests. So I did a series of performances using objects that were from a local junk, like kind of market thing, and I made a film about that as well. And I only bought the objects for £10 based on whatever the guy on the market stall wanted to give me, and then I improvised it about half an hour after. So there's something about losing control as well that interests me. You can watch the film of that on my website, because it is really nice just to go through it's a market that has dead people's stuff, like almost without boundaries. It's in South London, and you get like people's photos. You get like there is a jar of scabs off someone's skin. There's like sex toys that have completely eroded, that are probably quite old. Like there is no thing that is too inappropriate to get in this junk market, which makes me really happy. There's probably something wrong with me. And so shopping backwards is a workshop that I sometimes do, which I couldn't do because of COVID rules with you. But here I'm having a funeral for an object that's about to go into landfill for 1,000 years, which just involved cheering on. Like, I like the idea that you can throw anything away, and it's ethically fine as long as everyone around just cheers it on for 5 minutes, really loud, just whooping, and then it goes in the bin and it's okay again. Because it's like, I will buy something wasteful and then hope no one sees, and the shame is always much worse if a crowd of people give it a kind of euphoric funeral before you throw it in the bin. I did a series of talks on BBC Radio 4. You can probably listen to them on BBC Sounds, but I don't know whether it works here or whether it's just in England. But one of them is about a shopping catalogue and its history, and how it tracks the history of our wants and desires through these different products that it sells, but also linking it to the Whole Earth catalogue, which some people say is like the precursor to the internet. So, and it tracks the lineage of like hippie counterculture and the birth of the internet as well, which I'm really interested in. And so one of these talks, the one on breakfast cereals, started off as a performance where I'm dressed as breakfast cereal and talking about how it's really about like my attraction to the variety and the difference that big capitalism offers, but then realizing that if you took everything out of the boxes, the supermarket shelf would just be like mostly 1 or 2 ingredients. And so you can listen to that on BBC Sounds as well. It delves into like colonial histories of agriculture and like exploitation and extraction of resources. Often I'll take a deep dive into something that is just one object, and then through doing that, you always end up at everything in the world, I find. I recently did a project which was in Whitley Bay in the north of England, near Newcastle, and the local residents took photos of things in their houses, things that should have been thrown away a long time ago. That was what I asked them for. Things that really they couldn't justify having in their bedroom or in the loft. And they sent the photographs to me via WhatsApp. So here's 2 examples. And then I made some animations out of those. And this was an app that you could click on. So there was loads of clutter of objects, and some of them were clickable. So you could actually drag them around as well, because I worked with a software developer who made it so that you could kind of rummage through the website and find the animations, which were made specifically for the people who had sent me stuff. And you walked around the town, and there was a point where you could access this work. There were also other works that you could access via the same app. I like the physicality of it, and the thought that the internet could be dusty, and it is cluttered, it is a pile of data trash. Like, my desktop is worse than my bedroom floor, really. And I kind of like to relish the messiness of the internet, really. So here's one, but again, without sound, so there's not much point of you seeing it. But you can see roughly how it's animated in this really lo-fi way. And most of my work involves a voiceover poetic narrative that's often humorous as well. So it would be really ideal if you could hear that, because it's kind of the whole point of it. Because storytelling is my work. And nearly all of my work is available on my website, so you can watch the films there and hear the voiceovers. Let's go to the next one. I made a series of performances and films about a man called Martin Shipman, who is this guy, and I found his ID card on the floor outside of the big Citigroup Tower in Canary Wharf, which is it was the tallest building in London, I think. And I used to just point at the building sometimes until security took me away, because I found it really pleasing that you could, even if you were miles away, you'd be walking towards a building and it was the biggest thing and you were the smallest thing, and then you were powerful enough to be a threat to that as soon as you got close, because the ambiguity of your action was the threat, I suppose. And so security would want to know what you were doing. And through doing that, I found this ID card, and I thought, I could go into the tower now, I've got this. But I didn't, because I didn't really want to go in it anyway. I wanted to make a fan fiction story about this guy and the life I imagined for him, which was speculative and kind of sci-fi, it turned out. And in the performance that I enacted about this story, he becomes editor of the world, and he teams up with 2 other futurologists who are city traders. I'm quite interested in finance and the strange thing of the gold standard of gold as money, because it has an inherent worth, because it is rare, and then what happens when that's removed and we have futures, so you trading the idea of orange juice, or the in that film Trading Places, that deals with the kind of ridiculousness of futures, but also derivatives trading. It's already a fiction or a fantasy, like money now. And so I wanted to really bring that out by exploring this. He's actually a software developer at Citibank, but also felt like he looked really tired, and I wanted him to have a more exciting life within my stories. In this piece, it's called All Our Lives. I did another version called All My Lives, and so it started as a piece where you could book me as a kind of cleaner who would come round to your house for an hour, and then we would clean your house together while we planned how we would spend the rest of our lives together. And then after an hour, I would leave. And I met lots of interesting strangers that way. And then I did a version of it which didn't need me to be there, because the original version in people's houses, I didn't document it because I didn't want to appropriate the intimate, we said things to each other that were real, and I didn't want to make that into my art. So it was already better than art. So in this version, it's a bit more gallery friendly, and it's in the cafe of Salisbury Arts Centre, in the corner just away from the main cafe bit. People could sort through these socks as a way of making it less awkward, so they didn't have to look each other in the eyes while they used these prompts on a piece of paper to plan a life together. But because I wasn't there as a facilitator, it was more important that they were guided through a process of asking each other questions. So 2 members of the public who could come and use this, they might not know each other. Or it could be you do that with a friend, but you've never actually talked to them in that way before. And people made notes on the lives that they planned, and I then went to the prop room of the theatre that was part of the art centre and picked props that related to the lives that they'd planned. So there's lots of really good objects. It was just so good to go in a prop room, because you don't really need the play. You just actually just having a bunch of props is more exciting. Okay for time. Shout me when we're over. Oh, 5 minutes. Okay. So then through the process of doing these speculative lives and futures, of inventing these with strangers, I had taken notes that then I was able to use as a kind of set of instructions for making some sculptures, and a audio narrative that was in this space along with the sculptures. So it did generate a kind of documentation, but it was almost queering the documentation process. So it remains anonymous. It's not a breach of their confidentiality and trust, but it still spawned something else. Did a kind of residency in the Westfield shopping mall in the Olympic Park in London. It wasn't authorized by them, but it was sponsored by the Arts Council and Arbeit Gallery, which is a really good gallery, AREBYTE, which does a lot of stuff with art and tech in London. And so I spent months just being in the shopping centre, and then I would lead tours of the shopping centre which members of the public could come on, and we would make spontaneous sculptures in the Disney store by putting things together, or we'd sort of give gifts to each other within the group and explain why we'd chosen them. But we wouldn't ever buy anything. We would try on different clothes and make costumes and sort of, alter egos within some of the clothes shops. And we would write to the, John Lewis, the food court, the Waitrose CEO, and use the descriptions of products on the back of the boxes as the poetic inspiration. So it became a kind of art studio space that anyone could use, with me as the personal shopper / facilitator. And I made a film which was about the shopping centre, and you can watch it on my YouTube or on my website, and it's called Unicorns of Westfield, and it's a kind of like epic poem about the strange logic of the shopping centre, particularly the slogan T-shirts that were around a lot at that time in 2017. I think it's one of my favourite things that I've made because it's just already there. It's already kind of magical and strange and psychological, and a lot of the marketing was quite kind of apocalyptic, or so like at the end you see there's kind of cracked earth, a model on top of some cracked earth that's you can't. I'm not going to try and do it. I'll try one more time. The voiceover is really key, but there's a bit at the very end. Oh, God, never mind. It's just a poster advertising some clothing, but it's this model stretched out on a big cracked desert, like climate change scene. And I found the more I looked into the shopping centre, the more I found that there were these sort of dark sides to it. And so all of those are brought together in that piece. So time is up, really, but you can look at other projects that are associated with that shopping mall residency as well on my website. And there was also a game that you could play in the mall called Mallopoly. And yeah, I also have more recent works on my website, such as this one, which is about kind of remixing the Frans Hals Museum in Haarlem in the Netherlands, using their website to kind of create a new narrative. So collage is absolutely my, just to summarize, like collage is totally my method, or just, if you want to make my work, you just go into the world, whether that's a website or the street or wherever, a person's brain, you notice and you collect, and then you put it together in a new way and stick it back out there into the world. So go and do it, and thank you for having me. That's it.